Would you quit your job and walk away even if you weren't sure what you were going to do next? If you only had a vague idea of what might follow and no real backup plan? If you knew you had people depending on you? Could you do it? Could you just walk out on your job? That's what we're going to talk about in this week's episode. I'm Jeremy Klein, and this is Change Work Life. Hello and welcome to the Change Work Life podcast, the show where we're all about beating the Sunday evening blues and enjoying Mondays again. If you want to know how you can enjoy a more satisfying and fulfilling working life, you're in the right place. During the Spanish conquest of Mexico, history tells of Spanish commander Hernan Cortés scuttling his soldiers' ships. Unable to retreat, his men would have to conquer or die. Military history is littered with similar stories where the means of escape was deliberately destroyed or cut off, and success for the invading army was the only option. You can apply the same principle to your career. You can choose to leave your job without a safety net or backup plan, and so force yourself to have to succeed. For sure, it's an extreme option, but can it work, and at what cost? Well, today my guest is someone who did just that. Having just posted his best ever week in his physiotherapy practice, Mark Usher decided to burn his boats and quit his job. He now coaches high-achieving men to be the husband their wife brags about. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jeremy, it's really good to be here.
A lot of people will have heard of marriage counselling or couples therapy, but I bet a lot less have heard of men's coaching. Why don't you start by giving us a quick introduction to what this kind of coaching is about?
It's the million-dollar question, Jeremy, and it's so hard to give a real tangible one-liner answer to that. What I just would say is it's unique to men. Men, we've had so much cultural conditioning that we lone wolf life. We lone wolf the emotional journey that it is being human. And as a result, it takes, a unique set of skills and approaches to make men feel really safe, seen and heard, so that they can then, share their full soul and bring their full radical, authentic truth. And a lot of men's coaching, through my lens, is supporting men finding what their radical, authentic truth is, what makes them feel most alive, and bringing that to the surface. Of course, to be the husband she brags about, how to do that, uniquely within the context of marriage. But that would be the thing, that connecting a man with what brings him to full radical aliveness in life.
We'll explore a bit later how you found this, but just to clarify and allay anyone's fears, from what I know from our previous conversations, this is a million miles away from the masculine influences that we've seen in the news over the past few months. There's one individual in particular who I'm not going to name because I don't want to give him the oxygen of publicity, but he's a particularly toxic individual whose style of content tends to be revolting, misogynistic, absolutely diabolical. What you do, it's so far away removed from that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I intuitively think I know the exact person. And yeah, I wouldn't speak to such person. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of shame out there in men. And I think individuals like this, and there are a certain portion of guys, through their hurt and their shame, their undealt with, unhealed wounds, to bring a certain expression into the world that, it doesn't do them as men any favors, and it definitely doesn't do the sacredness of women, the masculine, feminine, sacred dance any favors. It's definitely a million miles away. The guys I work with, Jeremy, and I know coming from within my own marriage, I think one of the majority of men, going beyond the minority, there's always going to be that voice there. The majority of men have a deep love in them, a love to give their wives, their girlfriends, their partners, a love to give their kids, a love to give their work. If you even go spiritually and from a mystical perspective, we are love. That's the masculine core is just that omnipresent divine love. And I say masculine, it's not masculine men versus women. It's like that, just masculine core part. So men have that. And I find in my work, it's only when we get to own that we come alive. Most guys that come to me, they have this idea that you're not even allowed to speak to that. Like speaking to love for a lot of guys with the upbringing has been, that's what the wuss does. You're sort of, you're the girly in the playground. There was a lot of put downs. There's a lot of shaming of that element. Yet there is this divine love that, we come alive. We feel more at ease in ourselves when we're allowed to authentically bring that to life in whatever we're doing. And of course, the topic of today's discussion, a really incredible manifestation and embodiment of that full authentic love in the world is, giving voice to your message in the world, your mission in the world. And a lot of times that can come through a career change. So yeah, there's definitely a different voice for masculinity out there. It's not always the one that makes the headlines.
That's really good to hear. So I mentioned at the top that you were a physiotherapist before you found this line of work. So, I mean, going back, what started you down the track of going into physiotherapy?
What started me down the track was, even if I go back to my college days, Jeremy, when we were doing group research, I was the one that was putting my hand up for psychosocial aspects of whatever disease we were studying in that month. We did a lot of self-directed learning. So I had a lot of it there. To be honest, if I go back to before I applied for college, I actually really deep down wanted to do psychology. But at the time, I wasn't brave enough or courageous enough to put my hand up and say I wanted to do psychology, because that for me at the time, subconsciously anyway, was me sort of admitting to myself I was a little bit screwed up in the inside and I was deeply unhappy. And so, yeah, I went for the easier to explain and more socially acceptable path of physio. So the interest was always there. My first few years in physiotherapy, I started specializing in chronic pain treatment and management. That was predominantly, the psychological aspects, the emotional aspects, a lot of it, the most spectacular changes and transformations that happened, it was actually coaching. And when I finally sort of joined the dots and realized, okay, I'm actually going to be a much happier man when I just truly put all my chips in on the table of what my true love is. It's coaching people. It ended up being men, but it's like coaching men. That's what brings me to life. So let's just make that shift and let's do it early on. Let's not wait like 20 years, be unhappy and then do it. Let's just strike and do it now.
And how was the lack of all that stuff that you've just described showing up in your practice?
The lack was showing up, Jeremy, in I was good at what I was doing, but I wasn't passionate. It's like I had a high level of competence, hence my practice was growing, word of mouth was spreading, etc. But being very good at something and being in your genius zone is an entirely different thing. How it showed up, the one, I'll share this with people listening in, because, a lot of people might be, you might be on the fence wondering, it's like, how do I tell? Well, I had one question that I asked myself, Jeremy, and this is when I finally knew, it's like, okay, I've got to make this change. Being busy household, 2 kids, we're homeschooling, animals, with busy practice, and my wife with all her interests and my own personal interests, it was always a full schedule, still is. I didn't have a lot of time to myself to, abundantly do a lot of reading. And I had one reflection, Jeremy. It was, Mark, I asked myself, Mark, if you're in the kitchen where the coffee table was, and you had a stack of your 5 favorite physiotherapy books, and I like physio, don't get me wrong, people listening in, I actually really liked it. I was good at it. I had a deep interest in health. But on the other side of the table, I had 5 of my favorite, I'll generically call them my mind, body, spirit books. And I only had like 15 minutes in between clients, or 15 minutes, like the girls have went to bed. Which stack of books would I reach to? And Jeremy, it was like, it shook me just how sure I was. 100% of the time, I'd be reaching for the mind, body, spirit books. And that has been invaluable for lots of guys that I've coached, because a lot of guys come in coaching and, there's marriage, there's lots of issues in life. Quite often, an unexpressed, unmet need to change their career is often, often a bubbling under the surface issue for them That reflection by itself for a lot of these guys has been really telling. A lot of guys have just went, my God, Mark, immediately. And it's not the stack of books, which is related to my work. And that's sort of like a key distinguishing factor. It's really supported me in telling and making that decision.
I'm going to borrow that one. That's a brilliant metaphor. I absolutely love that. What were your thoughts? I mean, here you are, you've had your best ever week, and that's the point that you seriously think, okay, I want to quit this. There's got to be a lot of conflict there. I mean, here, you're recognizing you're doing well, it's providing you with the income, it's supporting your family. There must have been an internal struggle there as you make the decision about what to do next. Can you talk about, what that looked like, what that felt like?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important to point to. There is this inner emotional conflict and battle going on in a career change. It wasn't immediately obvious for me. I think I had some false absolute confidence in making the change immediately. And I think the self-doubt and the conflict sort of came out in the months and even indeed the years afterwards. What made it so clear in my mind that it was right in that moment, Jeremy, was, well, first of all, there was my own passion. My own passion was on a different topic. I was quite clear. It's like, Mark, to be at the top of a profession, but not even just to be at the top, to be able to serve people, within physiotherapy, I had to be researching. I had to be doing the courses. I had to keep on top of things. Well, I wasn't serving people correctly. So long term, it just wasn't sustainable. Yet there was also, it just was not serving myself and my wife in marriage and our aspirations as a couple, for our family, to have family time together. I could see like that there was a major collision course that if I stuck around, the success was coming at a big price, because the more and more clients coming in, it was brilliant financially, but it was, my evenings were being eaten up. My wife was really, really unhappy with that. We had this, the idealists in us that fell in love, several years prior to that. We were like, location independence, we can travel, we'd have loads of time, we'd homeschool our girls. So, the dream life was not going to happen. So there was a part of me, to be in integrity with myself, with my marriage and with my wife. There was a lot of clarity that the decision was right. That said, you entered this conversation quoting the historical beginnings of the whole burn the ships metaphor. It's been a really rough ride since then. I would definitely do it differently. I don't regret doing it. It was the way it was, and it got me to where I am now, and I've learned lots. But, if I was to guide people listening in, I would hold back on the whole burn the ships way of doing things. It's sort of nice in theory from my experience, but I don't think it sets a good, solid foundation under yourself to do it that way, from my experience.
So let's just dig in a bit to what that looked like. So what was the time between the decision to quit and actually doing? I mean, how much sort of notice did you give yourself?
This sort of even sounds crazy, when I slow down to reflect on it, but it was 24 hours. I literally, it was 24 hours. And I don't say this, sometimes in podcasts, you can really tell a story to make yourself seem super courageous. I tell the story and I look back with a little sense of, man, that was just absolute craziness. But it was on a Sunday. It was a Sunday afternoon. I still remember, Jeremy. I sat down with my beloved. There was a background awareness of this. It's not that I made the decision within 24 hours. I think it was just like a slow burning making of a decision that reached this crescendo. So it was not just a spontaneous, impulsive decision. But I sat down with my beautiful wife, Matilda, and I said to her, it's like, hey, I'm going to say something to you. It's like, don't hold me to this. Don't hold this against me. Just I need you to listen, but I need to take it out of my head and feel into what it sounds like when I just say it. And I shared with her, Jeremy, it was like, hey, I feel like I would be the freest man on earth if I quit working as a physiotherapist from now. And Jeremy, all of these metaphors and ideas of, the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I finally, for the first time in my life, realized what that was about. It's like my shoulders just dropped a half a foot. That just my whole body experienced this literal sensational experience of relief. And that was it. I looked at my wife. It's like, I can't deny. That's it. She was still quiet, looking at me sort of going, are you for real? But she was smiling. She could feel the enthusiasm that was just coming through me. She could feel that I was happier as a man. And the truth of that, it took a little bit of craziness from both sides, a lot of love, a lot of like, okay, we're stepping into the dark. But from that day, like the next day I showed up at work, I stopped taking new clients. I just saw I saw through the treatment program of the remaining clients, and some that needed more long-term care. I just, within a couple of sessions said, hey, I'm going to refer you on. And that was that. Yeah, I wouldn't do that again if I had to live it again. There was a lot more preparation. I know when you did the podcast with me recently, just a little bit of a background to the guys listening in, Jeremy had an amazing podcast where you gifted, all of your incredible 3 steps in a comprehensive nature. I definitely have went that way. I would have loved a Jeremy Klein to reach out and to coach me through the whole process. But hey, I'm here now. I'm better and stronger as a result of the experience.
So that period between that conversation on the Sunday and effectively running off your clients, how long was that? And what did you do during that period to prepare for what happened next?
Time-wise, from maybe it was a couple of months till I was like, okay, I had no more clients. So it was quite quick, it was quite rapid. What I was doing in preparation, I mean, I was still... I think I just had this new lease of life. It was finally, I had the full permission. It was like I was doing this new career. So I started looking at courses online, started reading all the books I wanted. I didn't feel guilty anymore. It was like, okay, I'm not a physiotherapist anymore. I am this new idea. I'm a men's coach. So there was a lot of enthusiasm and passion in life. So I just started devouring all the information I could get my hands on. And initially, I just started reaching out to other guys in the arena. It's like, other guys doing coaching. I had some knowledge of that was an important aspect of it. I probably would have leaned in more on that and networked with greater courage and greater tenacity and insistence to make those connections early on. But it was an important part for me forming, that new identity of this effectively new person I was having to become.
Okay. So you quit in the knowledge that you wanted to become a men's coach. How did you find out about men's coaching in the first place?
I found out, this is an important bridge, so it doesn't make it seem like it just was that one decision. I actually found out as I was working as a physiotherapist, and how I found out was multiple clients, male clients, were coming to me. It was working with women as well, but I just had a deep resonance with men. I've since known and discovered I had a ton of deep inner work to do in healing my shame and issues with masculinity, etc. Mightn't have the full length of time to go deep into that. So I had a deep resonance with connecting with men and bringing them on a journey. And it came about where, guys were coming in with lower back pain, and it was all with different pain conditions. And it was all to do with stress. It was all to do with how they were digesting or not digesting very well, psychological stresses and emotional issues. And I ended up just talking more and more with these guys. I might do, a little bit of the hands-on, but it was predominantly talking. And what spontaneously started happening, Jeremy, and I would, people listening in, this is actually a really beautiful thing. And I sort of encourage you to take note. How does a career change organically happen? How does your environment and the people in your environment, a lot of the times people are telling you where your genius zone is. How that happened for me was I was talking with these guys spontaneously. I wasn't thinking of men's coaching at that time, but, several guys distinctly said to me, it's like, Mark, I'm actually not coming. They got almost embarrassed. It's like, I don't have pain anymore. I don't know how to tell you this, but I don't really want any physiotherapy. It's just, I'm coming and I'm actually paying you now because talking with you is changing my life. Several men, and it took me by surprise, Jeremy, because several men actually said to me, and this is what really moved me and made me realize, wow, I really want to dedicate my life to mastering this art and making a career out of it and just making it my life's mission. I count on, in those early days, there's been 4 men who distinctly have looked me in the eyes and have said, Mark, coming to you and speaking with you, leading up in the weeks before I met you, or, some of them knew me like a long time, but before they entered that type of work and conversation with me, like, Mark, I was driving to our sessions and I was looking at the size of the tree and the speed I was doing on my speedometer and wondering, like, am I going fast enough to end it? And will that tree help me end it? They were deeply suicidal, deeply depressed, and just totally, absolutely disenchanted with life. And yet, here was this unqualified, for the job man, being me, with an open heart and a curiosity and just holding an open space for these men. And, by nature and nurture, I've definitely upskilled and learned much higher levels of, world-class competence in what's the art of men's coaching. But just that curiosity and holding a safe space, these men really trusted me. And all of them are thriving now. They're happier, they're healthier, they're enjoying their relationships. And that sort of it organically emerged as I was still a physiotherapist. And then I started making the links. And then, to answer your question, the term men's coach came out. I'm like, wow, well, that's it. That's what I'm actually already doing. But that's the term that other people have already given to it. So I continued from there.
So what was the initial plan when you stopped work? So at that point, did you have any clients, or was it from that point, I am a men's coach, okay, let's start building that business?
The initial plan, I'll be honest, this is more of the learning. I didn't have a big plan, or if I had, it was the most ridiculously oversimplified plan. It's like, I'll be a men's coach, I'll be world class at this. Like, I think that probably was about the height of it. What I now know is like, well, what's the business plan? What's the setup? How are you going to do it? What's your strategy, marketing, selling? All of that stuff came a long time later. It was a really oversimplified plan. It was sort of, let this organically evolve. The clients I had, it sort of started growing slowly but surely by word of mouth. Those initial guys, they continued with me. Some of them were coming long term. As they were doing it, little bit by little bit, as they found their grounding and their confidence in their own masculinity, in their own truth, they dropped the inhibitions to actually open up and have conversations with other men. And, there's this rubbish idea in society that men don't want to talk. Nothing could be further from the truth. Men are literally dying to talk. Some men, like statistically, nine out of 10 suicides, internationally, it's men taking their lives. They're dying to talk. Men want to talk. They just don't know how to get the first sentence out. They've experienced a lot of hurt in the past. So once men started realizing, it's like, okay, I can actually have a chat with this man. I can trust him. I'm safe. And they were hearing, I was just very honest and vulnerable and open. I wasn't an expert in these conversations. I was sharing a lot of my own struggles. I was sharing a lot of my own crap in life, a lot of relationship issues, emotional issues, etc., etc. The guys just took to it. So the business plan sort of organically grew, slowly but surely. But definitely, if I was to do it again, there again, retrospective, great wisdom, I'd have taken way more time to get way more detailed in what was my ideal vision, because I would have had, way more capacity to concentrate my thoughts, my talking, my taking action in a more constructive direction. I think I slowed my process down to getting where I am today by several years, for sure.
In hindsight, is that something that you would have done whilst you were still working as a physiotherapist, or is it just a different way of looking at those first few months after you stopped that?
Yeah, if I was going back, I probably would have slowed down the whole super quick decision to get rid of, physiotherapy to transition on. I probably would have slowed that down. I don't know. I probably would have aggressively went at it. I really wanted this, but I would have slowed it down by 6 to maybe 9 months, to have that sort of financial foundation under me, and definitely get a vision in place, because that informs absolutely everything after that. Without the vision in place, Jeremy, and just for people listening in, what I have found, the last year and a half, it's been a number of years, it's been 5 or 6 years transitioning. In the last year and a half, I've achieved infinitely more in my business from getting really having laser precision in the vision. What's the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan for my business, my mission? How am I going at that? It has skyrocketed to success. Going back, I would have brought a lot more of that precision in the early days that would have informed everything else and made sort of like a path of least resistance. You're not looking for an easy path. I think this is one thing. It's not looking for an easy path. There are going to be obstacles. There are going to be challenges. Entrepreneurship can be quite grueling. But you can find like a path of least resistance where, instead of having 300 obstacles in front of you, well, if you can bring it down to 50 obstacles, or if you can bring 10 obstacles down to 2 obstacles, it really allows you stay in a zone where there's higher hope and optimism. Because, unfortunately, a lot of people that make the change, they back off, after a year or two, they feel that they've failed. But if you can have that vision, it can support you emotionally, remaining focused and remaining in the type of state of mind and emotional state to stick with it in the long run. And the long run is spectacular. I feel much better now as a result of living from my truth, my authentic self, and feeling radically alive, getting up in the morning to do what I do, which is what I love.
So what made this difference in the past 18 months compared with the period before that?
It's a really great question. There's so many ways I could answer that, Jeremy, but to really get to the nugget of it, I've made peace with that nagging inner critic voice that was eating me up for years. There was always this sort of a part of me that I didn't know how to deal with. And like joining Deep Men's work in the last number of years, I've just brought this radical awareness to this part of me. And here's the thing, there's, when you do really deep work, sometimes in business, we sort of talk about inner critic, but it's not the realm of entrepreneurship. It's not the realm of the business mastermind. It's not the realm of, business podcasts, etc. But it's probably the most unspoken part of entrepreneurship. Every human has this inner critic. Every human has had, some parent, a mom, a dad, a step-parent, some teacher, siblings, some humans or society in general that has sort of wittingly or unwittingly put them down. And it's just learning that this part of me, when I came home with it and go, okay, there's this part of me, it's like I want to set up my podcast and the doubts will come in. It's like, that's okay. I don't have to take the doubts in my head seriously. I don't have to take the fear or the anxieties come up seriously. I can feel them. I can witness them. Then I put them on the shelf and I just make a courageous action and take a step towards my vision. And it's just repeating that process. I've actually come to relate with it that it's a really good sign for me, Jeremy, that the fears are coming up, that the inner critic is coming up. That means I'm actually really going at my vision full throttle. I'm not in a comfort zone. So on a daily basis, I'm reaching out to guys where I'm like, man, why would he actually want to come on my show? I know he's the right type of client. Whereas if I have no fear at all, I'm putting my sights way too low. That's probably been the biggest, most transformative thing that has happened in me, and a shift inside that's welcoming in the amazing results that I'm getting in the podcasts and clients signing up. So yeah, I'm interested to touch base with yourself, Jeremy. Does that make sense with your experience, or what shows up with the guys you work with?
Really interested. This making peace with your inner critic, was this a solo process and your own self-reflection? Was this something that you had help with, a coach or a counselor or something like that? I mean, what did that look like?
The birthplace of my career when I was doing generic men's coaching, and that was going, beautifully well, nothing explosive, but I was making a career out of it and having a lovely effect. You'll know from my podcast, people listening and haven't heard that, but my podcast, Be the Husband She Brags About, that came from like a literal breakdown or breakthrough moment in my marriage about 3.5 years ago. And like the crap hit the fan royally. My beautiful wife, she energetically sort of fell in love with another guy, and it's sort of showed me up for sort of like the man I felt I couldn't be. Deeply emotional. I didn't feel I could do this whole emotional attunement or intimacy, which is like defined as the simplest definition of intimacy is into me, you see. I didn't know how to do that. I was afraid of my inner world. So to answer your question, I found deep men's work a few years ago, and that was deep men's work. And I did a really rigorous, deep masculine men's coach training. Hence, I just got the qualification in that. But that was repeatedly and rigorously going into my inner world with support, with professional support, and then we were coaching each other's. And I came at home, Jeremy, from a lifetime of avoiding this part of me, like this. At times, that inner critic could be downright nasty with me. I could get to the point, like if I go 10 years ago, I got to the point of like suicidal tendencies. But like apart from those ultra extreme times, in everyday daily life and relationship and in my career within the focus of this conversation, it would beat me up. And it'd be like, who the hell do you think you are to invite him? Who the hell do you think you are to earn that type of money? Who the hell do you think you are to ask such fees? And it was this protective inner voice that followed me the whole way from childhood, but it was trying to protect me. It was the intention learned from childhood was beautiful for the 5, 6, 7-year-old me, where, sharing my fullest authentic truth at my kitchen table at home wasn't really an emotional safe place to share, to sing, to dance, to say, hey, I'm going to do this when I grow up. There was a lot of love, but there was a lot of unwitting shame of it. But deep men's work helped me just listen to that voice and recognize it's not me. That's just like the neuronal patterning of creative ways my nervous system had of protecting myself when I was younger. But there's no absolute truth in it. So I suppose the best way to say, I learned to become the witnessing awareness of these thoughts and emotions that would come up. And with that detachment or with that space, Jeremy, I was like, okay, I have a choice here. There's no absolute truth. So that thought can come up. Oh, you're a piece of dirt. Who are you to think? Like, okay, that's an interesting thought, but that doesn't serve me if I follow the command of that thought. So what's a better thought to follow? Send an email, invite that person. Okay, that feels empowering. That serves my vision. And it's just being able to be the witnessing awareness. And every person, I think I'd speak to this, every person listening in, I can guaranteed. Some people might get very disgruntled and go, no, I don't have an inner critic. I don't have any issues. Some people can get a little bit off the cuff, and that's okay. I would have got off the cuff before doing this deep inner work. But every person within a safe environment, deep men's work or women's work or, a retreat center, when the safety is there, every human being, without any exception, has some part of their persona that tries to put them down. And that's a really important thing on the road of entrepreneurship, to just get some space between that voice, realize it's not you. It doesn't mean any truth about you, and you can choose a different thought to follow.
That resonates so much with me. One of the first exercises I get my clients to do is an exercise which helps them to identify their internal saboteurs, their inner critics, because it can take all different forms, all different guises, all different kinds of messages, all different kinds of stories that it's telling yourself. And so, just identifying those thought patterns and recognizing them as that's all they are. They are thought patterns. They don't necessarily mean anything. They're there to serve a function, to maybe to try and protect you, but they're not necessarily in any way objective truth. And so it's, what you say is just so completely true. And that's recognized by the fact that I make it one of the first things that I ask my clients to look at, because it instructs and is relevant for the whole coaching process. I'm really grateful for how vulnerable you've been about, the story and how things were working so well with your wife. Just on the timeline thing, have I got it right that event sort of started to take place after you'd quit the physio, so when you were already into the men's work?
Yeah, I think time-wise, if I look back, maybe it was sort of like 3.5 years after the big bold change from physio to men's coaching. Yeah, it's probably about 3.5 years after that, and it's been about 3.5 years ago. So we're sort of halfway. It's halfway between the big change and today.
So, I mean, did thoughts come up like, hang on, I'm a men's coach here, and something is not going well for me from a masculine perspective? I mean, was there a voice in your head saying, I help people with this, why can't I fix it?
Totally. I mean, it was like, oh my God, this is like the paradox. Like, how do I admit this in public? For years, I've been coaching guys, I've been advising guys, I have all the answers, but I didn't have the answers for me. And yet that was cool. That was one of the most beautiful things. Life, and I suppose within this context, business, the results will let you know exactly where you're at. And this is one thing. I think the big thing for me is learning to become total friends with humility. The process, I call it heroic humiliation. I really, invite people listening in to get comfortable with that. We've had no role modeling of, humiliation. We tend to connotate that with social humiliation, being made feel like crap and etc. So we're like, no. But humility comes from hummus, which is the ground of truth of where you're truly at. And when you start getting that's in that learning period, that's what happened in my marriage, Jeremy. It was humbling. It didn't matter what my head thought about myself. It didn't matter what my head thought about my marriage, about, my opinions, but my wife, she's complaining about that. That's not a real issue. And, I invite people in. It's like, how do you relate with your business? I've heard a lot of people, it's like, they'll have all these amazing opinions about business and what works and should work. And like, this is the approach I'm going to stick with. And they'll actually argue with what a billionaire says, or they'll argue with what a business mentor says, but they don't have any money in their bank. And the results are showing them, they're trying to show them, all the results are saying, hey, you need to do some soul searching here. And humility is a real key practice to just come and go, hey, how are the results lining up around me in life? I did in my marriage, and I did like the last 18 months I'm doing in my business. When you do that, you're open to one thing which will transform everything within this conversation, your business. Bottom line, your profits, which is why do we get into business? We get into business, you have a beautiful purpose to serve people, but you got to make a profit. It opens you up to receiving feedback. And feedback could be in the guise of, a Jeremy Klein, a career coach that can give you and support you, give you feedback, or mentoring, or a business mastermind. That is what every single person who has created, beautiful success. Doesn't matter if it's a million, if it's a billion, some person's best success in business is to have a tasty, sustainable income every week, every month. It doesn't matter, but success on your terms. Every one of those people, without fail, have learned to receive feedback, to actively search for feedback from people that are a little bit further along the way, that can light up the path from them, so that they don't continually try and reinvent the wheel and, minimize and normalize not having the profits here, not having a successful business here. You don't have to do it all by yourself, but it's humility to admit, hey, I'm not having any results. This is something got to do with me. There's my thinking, my talking, my taking action. There's something to do with how I'm repeatedly showing up in those three creative tools: thinking, talking, and taking action. I've got to take ownership of that. From there, get the feedback. Guaranteed strategy to bring beautiful success. And every person listening in deserves that success. Why hold yourself back from it unwittingly?
When I first started looking into coaching, one of the things that struck me was the number of coaches who have their own coaches. And I think you've just summed up beautifully that even if you are in that area, even if you have the skills, even if you are helping someone else in your area of expertise, that doesn't mean that you can't. And indeed, it will be hugely beneficial if you do get advice from someone in that same area, even if it's the area where you specialize. It's, the kind of the doctor heal thyself. No, if doctors are ill, they go and see doctors. So, if men's coaches need help with their men's issues, sorry, that's a terrible turn of phrase, but, then they can get men's coaching. If a career coach or business coach needs help with their coaching, then they can go and see a career coach or business coach. It's just, it's beautiful. I just love the way that you expressed all that.
I'd add to that, and it's striking on such a point, and it's been so meaningful. I just really want to, just make it, maybe I'm just making it louder for people listening in. It's really to hear that, because I find just such a grief for me, Jeremy. I don't know for you, but it's there's such a grief for me when people aren't getting what they desire, the results they desire, the business they want, the money, the freedom, everything that goes with that in business or any endeavor in life. And it's just that conditioning of this society, which is, the powerful person lone wolfs it. I know men have a particular one, but, women have that as well. It's the powerful person, you should be confident, you should have full clarity, you should have all your stuff together and to make it in the world, that's the successful person. Nothing could be further from the truth. Always have that support. Always. Not just when, definitely, I'll go away from the podcast with Germany and Mark. I get that. I'm going to get a business coach for the next 6 months. No, always have that. Always have that support. I have it baked into myself as a way of life. But why do I do that? I've noticed the patterns. The patterns are the most successful people I've noted in deep men's work, Olympic champions, entrepreneurs, people that succeed. They have external support, expert support baked in, not just when they're struggling. No, they have it as a way of life. You need more support when you're successful than when you're struggling, because success brings insane challenges as well. So, it's just to build in the expectation that create external support as a way of life.
You need more support when you're successful. That's brilliant. That's an absolute gem. I love that. I want to just touch briefly on the financial aspects, because I know that this is something that's going to concern a lot of people, especially with the burning your boats idea. Because if you quit and maybe you've got an idea what you're going to do, maybe you don't have an idea what you're going to do, there's that practical, right, okay, so how are we going to pay the bills? And maybe you've built up a savings pot, you've got a bit of a runway, but perhaps it's finite. What did it look like for you when you quit physio? I mean, did you, even by that stage, have sufficient clients that you were bringing in what you needed, or had you set yourself, you had a runway, a time period within which you had to make it work? How did that look like?
Again, it was a really bumpy road. I would do things a lot different. I want to that's the golden thread. If people have been listening in this far, it's it was a bumpy road, unnecessarily so. How that looked was there were severely cash-strapped times. Did I have clients? Yes. One of the big things looking back, Jeremy, was I didn't have an identity as a men's coach. And that was I had this, there again, the inner critic or the inner saboteur, as you were calling it. It's there was this part of me going, hey, I'm getting the results for guys, but there was some part of it that I didn't believe I was worth it. No matter what they were saying, it's hey, you saved my life. Hey, my life is going better. I think this is really key for people listening in, is do whatever is available to you to slowly but surely, in a way, you don't have to have a quantum leap in identity shift. But there's this thing, like identity, you can build identity. Identity comes from Greek or Latin, I'm forgetting which root, but it's identitas, which is repeated beingness. If you repeatedly keep showing up and consciously going, hey, I'm a men's coach, or, somebody could be whatever it is. I'm now an artist. I'm not an accountant. But you hang around. I think one of the highest leveraged things I'd advise people to speed up that process is first of all, go all in, go submersive. Try and find, if you're doing it a little bit, you haven't burned the ships, try and find an hour every day. Be consistent with it. Consistency over intensity. Sometimes you'd be like, oh, you feel it on a weekend and you go crazy and you invest 3 or 4 hours, but then you get frightened and you don't do anything with it for 2 weeks or a month or a couple of days. No, your identity will shift really, really quickly when every single day you spend 1 hour totally submerged in that topic. In the topic, let's say mine is men coaching, and people listening in, fill in the blank, whatever your career shift might be, and what that identity is. What that provides you with to answer the question, with the shift to asking what you're worth. You won't ask what you're worth until you really believe it's like, hey, I'm actually coming from this identity. When I started shifting, going, really believing, I'm a bloody good men's coach. When that marriage breakdown or breakthrough situation happened, and I finally absolutely did the work, it was like there was this quantifiable part. It's like, I am there. I have done this work. You start believing it. And then, one thing I would have done better, I would have got direct support from people in how to market and how to sell, and particularly selling. I had a major sort of thing that selling was unethical, deep hidden beliefs that money was wrong, etc., etc. I would advise people, listening in, get books onto your shelf on selling, the art of selling, and get it as it's the most beautiful spiritual practice in the world is to sell. If you have a product or, a service, mine was coaching. If you have something that's of deep value, you just know it's of deep value to the person that might purchase that, might invest their hard-earned cash in what you have to offer. You have an ethical obligation to do whatever is in your power to support them in making that decision to go, hey, yeah, I actually love your art, or hey, yeah, I love coaching. This is going to transform my entire life. To learn the art of selling. And that's the thing in coaching. For years, I was getting better and better and better at coaching, Jeremy. But, to invite people in, I was holding myself back because I was getting frustrated with the lack of money in my bank account. Yeah, word of mouth got to a certain point, but my fees weren't rising and I didn't know how to sell. When I finally went, okay, I need to upskill in selling, and I devoured all the books in selling, now my confidence came alive. I love selling now. I love talking about it. I'm talking about it now. I'm really empowered. And the selling skills opens up my capacity to sell, to introduce more people to the experience of it with me, which when you get really good at selling, inevitably your fees go up, which if you can do that early on and upskill and start enjoying the selling aspect of, your career shift, you're going to have the fees coming up really quick, way quicker than they could if you don't upskill in that. And you're trying to get to rely on guesswork, or people you're putting the responsibility in your potential client. They should just get why my art is so important, or they should just get, men's work is really important. They should just get the idea. No, that's all on you. That's your responsibility as a person. So yeah, it's another major lack in those first few years when myself and my family went through way more impoverished times financially. I stuck with it. My why and my ultimate vision was strong enough to bring me through. I honor myself, but again, people listening in, get the selling right as early on as you can, and it's the path of least resistance to you honoring, what it is you're here to gift the world.
So what does your business look like now? Is it purely one-to-one coaching, or is it other products or services? How would you describe what you've got now?
It's in transition. The one-to-one coaching I really love yet there is a limit in it. Big part of my mission in the world, a few months ago, I set a vision, a goal that by the end of 2027, I'd have 10 million husbands around the planet listening in on a weekly basis to my podcast. Because part of my vision, sort of beyond the business end of it, I was terrified. A few years ago, I was in the floods of tears late one night. I think it was January 3rd, a few years ago, where I was in the floods of tears. I was petrified at what was happening on the planet. And my girls, it was like, when I die, I'm not going to leave Earth any better off, or am I? Do I have that power? So with that vision, and again, it's the vision. Like, I'm just bringing people back. Get your most elaborate, like wild, what's the old saying? It's like, aim for the moon, because if you miss, you land in the stars. Go for your wildest, even impossible dream. I've heard some people say, just set what's your impossible dream that excites you. That vision excites me. So I realize, okay, one-on-one coaching, I can't, create that impact in the world. What it's shifting to, I still will have one-on-one coaching, Jeremy, but I have Marriage Transformation Heroes, which is becoming like the flagship 4-month online small group training where, a small bunch of guys around the planet are going to come in, have an intensive training on literally just the self-mastery skills of how to be the husband she brags about, how to become the marriage transforming hero of the relationship. And there's a tried and trusted system. Beyond that, and as I say, we're in transition. What I'd really love to see is I have 100,000 men, husbands around the planet by the end of 2027, taking part in the online membership, which is going to have the full-on training. I don't know exactly how it's going to look. There's probably going to be men's groups, support groups, accountability, where men can come together and get the most inspirational support and guidance available to help them just nail it, knock it out of the park in this sacred role. So yeah, a lot of transition, but I think you can feel from my energy here, I'm super pumped and excited. And a part of it, Jeremy, is, and again, this is just to be really honest with people listening in, this lone wolf thing and this idea in society where, you're meant to have all this total certainty of how a thing is going to play out. If you've total certainty on how something is going to play out in your career switch, think again. That's not going to inspire you. If you have baked in absolute certainty, if there's zero fear, you're not stretching yourself enough, and it's probably you're not going to be motivated enough for the long term. In some senses, I don't have all the answers for that, but that's the excitement of it. It's just making it possible. That's what drives me on.
Mark, I'm going to be absolutely fascinated to see how your business pans out over the next few years and to see how you hit your goal. And I'm going to say how you hit your goal in 2027, not if, but how you hit your goal for 2027. Along this journey, I'm sure that there are many resources, books, podcasts, speakers, whatever, who have helped you. Can you maybe mention one or two that deserve special mention as really having opened your eyes to something or really helped you out on a particular thing?
Yes, absolutely. There's 2 books that jump out at me. The first is The E-Myth and I have the book on the shelf behind me. I think it's Michael Gerber, excuse me if you just type in The E-Myth on any of the Amazon or that. It's one of these classics. I think there's 2 million sold. The biggest insight from that was, I am not my business. I am working on my business. There again, it's like the disconnect. I psychologically disconnected from my inner critic. That was not me, but I psychologically disconnected from my business. There's my business organism, and I come to work on my business organism. I'm not working in it. This is not me. If the business organism has a bad week, or, I do a certain idea and the launch fails, or the client doesn't sign up, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to learn the business organism is not being optimized yet. So it's helped me just make the business and not a personal journey. It doesn't make there's no bad reflections on me as a person. Like, the business organism is not there yet. That was a game-changing insight that book brought, along with many, many others. So I really advise people check that one out. And I mentioned about the number one skill set. I would say for life, but definitely in career change, you've got to learn selling as a skill. And I think the title is Building a Story Brand. If you check in Story Brand by Don Miller, that has been like a life transformer, a business transformer, and definitely a profit transformer for me. It's all based on, the person, the business that wins in a market is the one that has the clearest message. That when people in their scattered brains with all the inner noise and the outer noise, when they arrive at your website, your brochure, whatever it is that marketing collateral is, if within, they're going to make that decision to read further or not within the first 3, 4, 5 seconds max. You've got to have a really clear message. And yeah, that has transformed everything. My podcast numbers, everything has skyrocketed since implementing that. So they are the two heaviest hitting resources I can point people towards.
Awesome. Well, as usual, there will be links to those also in the show notes. I'd love to put the link for where people can find you. Where would you like to send them?
Thank you for that opportunity, Jeremy. There's 2 resources online. First of all, don't click into any social media or that. That's a whole personal and professional reason why I have for that, to keep my attention completely on my mission and writing creative work. But you can find it at my website, kingsoffreedom.me. If you go over there now, if there's anybody interested, I'm going to say husbands interested, but sometimes wives are quadruply interested to know there's a free resource there. It's 15 habits to be the husband she brags about. It's like the highest leverage, simple habits to transform your marriage. That's there on email sign up. And of course, the Be the Husband She Brags About podcast. That's the other resource where pretty much every single thing I talk to, speak to, and express, it just aims to support guys become the marriage transforming hero of the relationships. So that's pretty much black and white. If people are really interested, if that can serve them, that's where you'll find me.
Fabulous. Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show. This has been quite an inspirational story. Thank you so much.
Jeremy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, and I really hope it's been of value for people listening in.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that interview with Mark Usher. So many great takeaways from that conversation, especially early on where Mark was saying that people were coming to him when he was still practicing as a physio, not because they needed his skills as a physio, but because they wanted to talk to him. He was offering them an outlet to discuss things which were on their mind, which they thought Mark could help with. A great question you can ask yourself is, what do people routinely ask you for help with? And if you can't think of anything, why not ask them? Something I have my coaching clients do is to do a sort of 360 exercise where they go and ask family and friends a few questions, one of which is, what would you come to me for help for? If you're at a career crossroads and you're not sure what to do next, then that can be a great data point to bring into the mix. Now, whilst Mark acknowledged that he might do things differently had he had his time again, he also recognised that you couldn't have 100% certainty. You needed that element of fear. It's down to you and your own personality as to which end of the spectrum you're more drawn towards. For many of you, simply burning your boats and walking away from the job without a clear plan just isn't going to work for you. But waiting for the stars to align, waiting until you're 100% certain, that's almost certainly a recipe for just not taking any action at all. Yes, we can gather data, yes, we can do the introspection, but at some point you're just going to have to take action, even if you're not completely sure whether it's the right action to take. And maybe there might be a little bit of a course correction further down the line. If you want to see the show notes for this episode, there's a transcript, a summary of everything we've talked about, and links to the resources Mark mentioned. They're at changeworklife.com/158. That's changeworklife.com/158. Now, as Mark mentioned, I had the pleasure of being a guest on his podcast a little while ago. I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes as well, so do take a listen to that. I go into some detail about the process I follow when I'm doing my coaching with clients, so if you're interested in finding out more, do have a listen to that episode. I set it out in a bit of detail, and I think it'll give you a good idea as to what coaching with me might be about. And if you're interested, you can go to changeworklife.com/coaching. That's changeworklife.com/coaching, where there's a bit more information, and you can book a call with me to find out more. As always, we've got another great conversation coming up in 2 weeks' time, so if you haven't subscribed to the show, make sure you do that. If it's Apple Podcasts, there's a plus button. If it's Spotify, there's going to be a subscribe button or something. So make sure you're subscribed, make sure you never miss an episode, and I can't wait to see you in 2 weeks' time. Cheers. Bye.